Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the annals of history. As you settle in for a restful slumber or perhaps a moment of quiet repose, I invite you to embark with me on a fascinating exploration of the lives and times of medieval kings. Before we begin our tale, I would love to know where in the world you are joining us from and what time of day it is for you. Please do leave a comment and share a bit about yourself. And if you find yourself captivated by the allure of historical storytelling, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel for more tranquil and engaging content. Now, let us set the stage. Imagine a time long past, an era of grand castles, noble knights, and powerful monarchs who ruled with an iron fist. The medieval period in Europe was a time of great change, a time when the fate of nations rested upon the whims of a select few individuals. But behind the pomp and pageantry of the royal courts lay a darker side, a world of debauchery, cruelty, and eccentricity that often went unchecked. In this documentary, we will peel back the layers of history to reveal the shocking and sometimes disturbing behavior of medieval kings. As we delve into the lives of these monarchs, it is important to remember the context in which they ruled. In an age where the divine right of kings was accepted as fact, rulers wielded absolute power over their subjects. They were seen as gods among men, anointed by the heavens to lead and govern as they saw fit. But as the old adage goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the medieval period was rife with examples of kings who abused their authority in the most unimaginable ways. One of the most striking aspects of medieval kingship was the sheer opulence and excess that characterized the royal courts. Kings and queens lived in a world of unimaginable luxury, surrounded by the finest goods and services that money could buy. They resided in sprawling castles with grand halls, sumptuous bedchambers, and immaculately manicured gardens. They wore clothing made from the most expensive fabrics, adorned with precious gems and intricate embroidery. And they feasted on the most lavish meals, indulging in a seemingly endless array of delicacies from around the world. But these royal banquets were not just a display of wealth and power. They were also a breeding ground for debauchery and excess. Medieval kings were notorious for their love of food and drink, and they often indulged in these pleasures to the point of gluttony. They would consume enormous quantities of meat, bread, and sweets, washing it all down with copious amounts of wine and ale. Some kings were known to eat up to 5,000 calories a day, a staggering amount that would put even the most voracious modern eater to shame. One particularly egregious example of royal gluttony was William the Conqueror, the Norman king who invaded and conquered England in 1066. William was a fierce warrior and a skilled military strategist, but he was also known for his love of food and drink. In fact, he became so fat in his later years that he could barely ride a horse, let alone lead his armies into battle. According to one account, William's excessive weight gain was the result of a particularly indulgent feast, during which he reportedly consumed an entire roast goose, a whole loaf of bread, and several flagons of wine. But William was not the only medieval monarch to succumb to the temptations of gluttony. Many kings and queens were known for their lavish feasts and extravagant dining habits. In the 15th century, for example, the court of King Richard III of England was renowned for its opulent banquets, which featured such delicacies as roast swan, peacock, and even porpoise. These feasts were a way for kings to display their wealth and power, and to impress their guests with their culinary prowess. But the excesses of the royal courts were not limited to food and drink. Medieval kings were also notorious for their love of entertainment, and they would often go to great lengths to amuse themselves and their courtiers. They would host elaborate tournaments, complete with jousting and other feats of martial prowess. They would stage grandiose pageants and masks, featuring elaborate costumes, music, and dance. And they would engage in a wide range of leisure activities, from hunting and hawking to chess and backgammon. Of course, not all entertainment in the medieval court was so innocent. Kings and queens were also known to indulge in more scandalous pastimes, such as gambling, drinking, and even sexual promiscuity. In fact, many medieval monarchs had a reputation for being notorious womanizers, engaging in extramarital affairs and fathering illegitimate children with alarming frequency. One such king was Henry I of England, who ruled from 1100 to 1135. Despite being married to Matilda of Scotland, Henry was known for his numerous mistresses and illegitimate offspring. According to some accounts, he fathered as many as 20 or 30 children out of wedlock, many of whom went on to hold important positions in the church and government. Henry's promiscuity was so well known that he was even given the nickname Beauclerc, meaning fine scholar, as a sarcastic reference to his less than scholarly pursuits. But while the debauchery and excess of the medieval court may seem like harmless fun in retrospect, it often had serious consequences for those who were caught up in it. Kings and queens who indulged too heavily in food, drink, and other pleasures often suffered from a range of health problems, from obesity and gout to liver disease, and even premature death. And their subjects often bore the brunt of their excesses, as resources were diverted away from important matters of state in order to fund the lavish lifestyles of the nobility. But the dark side of medieval kingship was not limited to mere overindulgence. In fact, many monarchs of the time were known for their cruelty and brutality, meting out harsh punishments to those who dared to cross them. In a world where the king's word was law, even minor offences could result in gruesome and painful consequences. One particularly notorious example of royal cruelty was the practice of execution by hanging, drawing, and quartering. This grisly punishment, which was reserved for the most serious crimes against the crown, involved hanging the condemned person until they were nearly dead, then disemboweling them and burning their entrails in front of them. Finally, the body would be cut into 4 pieces and displayed in public as a warning to others. This horrific practice was used by many medieval kings as a way to assert their authority and strike fear into the hearts of their subjects. One king who was particularly fond of this punishment was Edward I of England, who ruled from 1272 to 1307. Edward was known for his brutality and ruthlessness, and he often used hanging, drawing, and quartering as a way to deal with his enemies and those who opposed his rule. In one particularly gruesome incident, Edward ordered the execution of a Welsh prince named Dafydd ap Gruffudd, who had led a rebellion against English rule. Dafydd was captured and brought before Edward, who sentenced him to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. According to contemporary accounts, Dafydd was dragged through the streets of Shrewsbury on a hurdle, then hanged until he was nearly dead. His body was then cut down, and his entrails were removed and burned in front of him. Finally, his body was cut into 4 pieces and sent to different parts of the country as a warning to others who might consider rebelling against the crown. But Edward was not the only medieval king to use such brutal methods of punishment. In fact, many monarchs of the time were known for their cruelty and their willingness to use violence to maintain their power. Some kings would order the torture of prisoners in order to extract confessions or information, while others would use public executions as a way to strike fear into the hearts of their subjects. One particularly sadistic king was John of England, who ruled from 1199 to 1216. John was known for his cruelty and his disregard for human life, and he often used torture and execution as a way to punish those who opposed him. In one infamous incident, John ordered the execution of a group of Welsh hostages who had been sent to him as a gesture of goodwill. The hostages, who included women and children, were brutally mutilated and then hanged from the walls of the castle where they were being held. John's cruelty was not limited to his enemies, however. He was also known for his mistreatment of his own subjects, particularly those who were unable to pay the heavy taxes he imposed. In one case, John ordered the imprisonment of a man who had fallen behind on his taxes, and then had him tortured in order to extract payment. The man was suspended by his feet and had his head held over a fire, causing him to suffocate from the smoke. But perhaps the most infamous example of John's cruelty was his treatment of his nephew, Arthur of Brittany. Arthur was the son of John's older brother Geoffrey and was seen by many as the rightful heir to the English throne. In order to eliminate this threat to his power, John had Arthur imprisoned and then, according to some accounts, personally killed him in a fit of rage. The story of Arthur's death is shrouded in mystery, but one popular legend holds that John ordered his nephew's eyes to be put out and then had him thrown into the Seine River to drown. Another version of the story claims that John stabbed Arthur to death with his own hands, then weighted his body down with stones and dumped it into the river. Regardless of the specifics, the death of Arthur of Brittany stands as a chilling example of the lengths to which medieval kings would go to maintain their power. In a world where the monarch's word was law, even the most innocent and vulnerable members of society were not safe from the cruelty and brutality of those who held the reins of power. Of course, not all medieval kings were as sadistic as John or as brutal as Edward I. Some monarchs were known for their more eccentric behaviours, indulging in strange hobbies or peculiar habits that set them apart from their peers. One such king was Henry VIII of England, who ruled from 1509 to 1547. Henry VIII is perhaps best known for his tumultuous personal life, which included 6 marriages and the beheading of 2 of his wives. But beyond his marital woes, Henry was also known for his extravagant tastes and his love of the finer things in life. He was a voracious collector of art and artifacts, and he spared no expense in adorning his palaces with the most luxurious furnishings and decorations. But Henry's extravagance extended beyond mere material possessions. He was also known for his love of food and drink, and he would often host lavish banquets that lasted for days on end. These feasts were a showcase of Henry's wealth and power, featuring the most exotic and expensive delicacies from around the world. One particularly decadent dish that was often served at Henry's banquets was a roasted swan